The church has been talking about Jesus for 2,000 years, and in all that time, they've managed to leave out the most interesting parts. Not the miracles, not the sermons, not the greatest hits. I mean the pattern, the thing underneath all of it that once you see it, you can't unsee. There are 7 things Jesus did, things that are right there in the text in plain sight, that most churches either skip over, soften, or just don't talk about. And when you line them up together, they don't describe the gentle, soft-focused Jesus most of us were handed. They describe someone who was deliberately, consistently doing one thing, moving toward the people the institution had written off. Stay with me, because this is going to reframe some things. This is Scripture Unlocked. We take the text seriously, which means we don't let institutions decide what you're allowed to see in it. No prosperity gospel, no performance. Just the words and what they actually say. Here's what most of us were taught about Jesus. He came, he preached love, he died for our sins, he rose again. End of story. Get to church on Sunday, give your tithe, behave yourself, and wait for the reward. The version most of us got, especially in black churches, especially in African and American church culture, was heavy on obedience and light on context. You were taught what Jesus said, but not the world he said it into. You were taught the outcome, but not the method. You were given a conclusion without the argument. And here's the thing about arguments. When you don't show your work, people can't check it. They have to take your word for it. And the institution has been asking you to take its word for it for a very long time. But the text is right there. And when you actually read it, not devotionally, not looking for a verse to paste on Instagram, when you read it the way you'd read any other ancient document, as history, as literature, as a record of a real person doing real things in a real political context, a pattern emerges. 7 specific things. Let's go. Point 1. He deliberately left the sentence unfinished. Luke chapter 4. Jesus is back in his hometown of Nazareth. It's the Sabbath. He walks into the synagogue, stands up to read, and he's handed the scroll of Isaiah. He reads from Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he stops. He rolls the scroll back up, sits down, and says, Today, this is fulfilled in your hearing. That's where most churches stop too, the beautiful, affirming part. But here's what he didn't read. The very next line of Isaiah 61, the part on the scroll he was holding, says, And the day of vengeance of our God. He stopped before vengeance, on purpose. This was a room full of people who knew that text. They would have heard the pause. He was making a statement. I'm not here to announce punishment. The mercy era is open. The judgment era, he didn't announce it. The church has spent centuries preaching punishment. Jesus, with the scroll in his hands, edited it out. That's not a small thing. That's the whole frame, and we're only 1 point in. Quick pause. If this is opening something up for you, the actual text, not the sanitized version, hit subscribe. These take real time to research and write, and your subscription is what makes the next one possible. Now back to it. Point 2. He started where power wasn't. Jerusalem was the center of everything. Religiously, politically, institutionally. The temple was there. The priests were there. The Sanhedrin was there. If you wanted legitimacy, you went to Jerusalem and you got it stamped. Jesus launched his ministry from Galilee, a northern backwater region that the religious establishment looked down on. So looked down on that when Philip tells Nathanael he's found the Messiah and he's from Nazareth, Nathanael's response is, Can anything good come from Nazareth? That's not polite skepticism. That's a cultural insult. Nazareth was nowhere, and Galilee was the land of that nowhere. Jesus didn't start at the top and work down. He started at the margins and moved inward. That's not a detail. That's a thesis. The source, whatever you want to call the divine, doesn't flow from institutions outward. It moves from the edges toward the center. The church tells you to go to the institution to find God. Jesus started his entire operation by proving that's backwards. Point 3. He built his team from people the system had rejected, 12 disciples. Let's look at who they actually were. Fishermen, manual laborers, not scholars, not seminarians, not ordained. Peter was a fisherman. Rough, uneducated by the standards of the time, impulsive enough to chop someone's ear off at the arrest scene. And then there's Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. In first century Roman-occupied Judea, tax collectors were Jews who worked for Rome. collecting taxes from their own people and skimming off the top. They were considered traitors, collaborators, the most hated people in the community. Jesus walked past that booth, saw Matthew, and said, "Follow me." No theological credentials required, no letters of reference, no committee approval. The institution had decided who the qualified people were, and Jesus went to the water and the streets and found his. If your church tells you God only speaks through ordained leaders, through the qualified, through the credentialed, read who Jesus actually chose. Then read it again. Point 4. He said, "But I say to you." And that was radical. Every rabbi in that tradition built their authority the same way. You cited the tradition. Rabbi Hillel said this. Rabbi Shammai taught that. You established yourself through the weight of those who came before you. That was how credibility worked. You quoted the chain. Jesus taught differently. He'd quote the Torah and then correct it. You have heard it said, "But I say to you." Over and over. That phrase, that structure. A brown-skinned man from a region people openly looked down on, with no rabbinical credentials, standing in front of religious leaders and rewriting how the sacred text was to be understood. Not quoting a chain, not deferring to tradition, just, "I say to you." That's not humility. That's an authority that doesn't come from the institution. And the institution knew it. That's why they killed him. Point 5. He kept healing on the Sabbath on purpose. The Pharisees weren't bad people who hated healing. They had a legal framework. And within that framework, healing counted as work. Work was forbidden on the Sabbath. These were rules people had spent generations developing with real theological intention. And Jesus kept breaking them. Repeatedly, deliberately, not accidentally, not once. And when they confronted him about it, he didn't apologize or explain an exception. He said, "The Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath." That's a complete inversion. The institution had built a structure that was supposed to serve human flourishing, and it had calcified into something people had to serve instead. The rule had become the point. Jesus broke the rule to prove the rule had missed it. This isn't about whether you should rest on Saturday. It's about what happens when a religious institution starts confusing its structures with the actual thing the structures were built for. It's been happening ever since. It's happening now. Point 6. His touch worked backwards. Under the purity laws of Leviticus, contamination flowed in one direction. If you were clean and you touched something unclean, a leper, a corpse, a woman who was hemorrhaging, the uncleanness transferred to you. You became ritually impure. That's how the whole system worked. Impurity was contagious. Purity wasn't. So what you were supposed to do was stay away, protect your cleanness, which also meant isolate the sick, the bleeding, the dead, the outcast, for their own sake, supposedly, but also, conveniently, for yours. Jesus touched all of them. The leper in Matthew 8, the hemorrhaging woman in Luke 8. She touched him, actually, and he felt it and turned to find her. Jairus' dead daughter. He didn't step back, he moved in, and instead of becoming unclean, they became whole. The contamination didn't transfer to him. His wholeness transferred to them. That is a statement about how the divine operates, not away from the broken toward the safe, but toward the broken from wherever wholeness comes from. The purity laws had built a wall. Jesus walked through it every time. Point 7. The first witnesses were women. That wasn't accidental. Easter morning. The resurrection. The single most important event in the entire Christian story. Who does the text say was there first? Women. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome. Depending on which gospel you read, the names vary slightly, but the fact doesn't. The first people to arrive, the first to see, the first to be sent to tell the others, all women. Now, here's the thing. In the dominant Jewish legal tradition of the first century, women's testimony carried significantly less weight in formal proceedings. Josephus, writing in Antiquities, records it plainly. He's reflecting the mainstream view of his era. It wasn't a fringe position. If you were fabricating a resurrection story and you wanted people to believe it, strategically, rhetorically, you would not choose women as your primary witnesses. It would hand your critics an easy rebuttal. The choice makes no sense from a PR standpoint. And yet, the text doesn't flinch. It doesn't say, "and Peter confirmed it," before giving the women credit. It says women saw it first. Women were sent to tell it first. The divine chose the witnesses whose word the world wasn't designed to accept. The pattern holds all the way to the end of the story. Here's what these 7 things add up to. This isn't a collection of interesting footnotes. This is a consistent, deliberate operating method. Every single time, Jesus moved toward the people the institution had discarded and away from the people the institution had crowned. He launches from the margins. He builds from the rejected. He breaks the rules to prove the rules had stopped serving people. He puts his hands on the ones everyone else was avoiding. And the institution that grew up after him, the one that co-opted his name to justify colonialism, to enforce apartheid, to bless slavery, to sell prosperity gospel to people who are already struggling. That institution built itself by doing the exact opposite. It moved from the top down. It crowned credentials. It isolated the broken. It made the rules the point. That's not an accident either. When a system wants to control people, it takes the thing people love, in this case, Jesus, and it softens the edges until he becomes a mascot for whatever the institution already wants to do. But the text is still there. All 7 of these are in the text. None of it is hidden. What's been hidden is the pattern, and you've just seen it. So here's the question that matters. If Jesus consistently moved toward the people the system had written off, where does that leave the version of God most of us were handed? The one who rewards the obedient, blesses the prosperous, and requires you to go through the institution to get to him? It doesn't match. And I think, deep down, you already knew that. That's why you're here. 7 things. 1 pattern. A man who kept putting himself between the institution and the people the institution had given up on. That's the Jesus in the book. Not the soft-focused portrait, not the prosperity gospel mascot, not the one who tells you to sow a seed, offering so your breakthrough can come. The one who stopped reading the scroll before vengeance, who started in Galilee on purpose, who picked the fisherman and the trader, who said, "But I say to you," without flinching, who kept healing on the wrong day, whose touch made broken people whole instead of making him unclean, who sent women to carry the most important news in human history because apparently that's just how the divine works. That Jesus isn't hidden. He's just been inconvenient for people who need you manageable. Read the text, trust what you find. See you in the next one.